You're welcome on Black Fire Network. It's me, Africa Maria, with my colleague, INNOSSETU, and of course, today is a Tuesday, and uh, 26th of March. Yeah. Sorry about that. Of course, we welcome you here on our live on Black Fire Network. Uh, Today is a Tuesday, and we are broadcasting live from Kampala, Uganda. Um, Today's topic is China in Africa and racial capitalism. The existence of China in Africa is not something that is new. Apparently, China is everywhere in Africa, so this is not something new. But of course, the relationship between China and Africa, as well as the concept of racial capitalism, of course, are with the various dimensions. Um, China engagement with Africa has grown significantly in recent decades, and we know are driven by its need for natural resources, market access, and strategic interest. China has become Africa's largest trading partner. Um, of course, suppressing traditional partners such as the United States and the European countries. China involvement in Africa includes investment in infrastructure development, resource extraction, construction projects, and trade. Now we know that Chinese companies are active in sectors such as energy, mining, telecommunications, manufacturing, and construction. China's approach to engagement in Africa is often characterized by infrastructure for resources deals. Of course, where Chinese companies provide infrastructure development in exchange for access to natural resources. These deals have sparked debates about their economic, social, and environmental impacts on the African countries. We should always remember that Chinese presence in Africa has both positive and, of course, negative implications. But the positive is that the negative is more, the negative outweighs the positive. Of course, we know that Chinese investment contributes to infrastructure, of course, development, but this development we are not even sure how long it's going to last because, first of all, we have experienced fake infrastructures. Um, the infrastructures are not as strong as the Chinese promise the Africans and all that comes with it. Now, when it comes to racial capitalism, of course, racial capitalism refers to the intersection of racial dynamics and capitalist economic systems. Now, where race-based hierarchies and inequalities shape economic relationships, power structures, and social outcomes. The racial capitalism has emphasized has emphasized historical and intertwined of course, the African existence, of the current African existence. And usually this is characterized with racial exploitation, oppression, and discrimination. And as we see the existence, we have been talking about the Chinese existence and what they're doing in Africa. And basically, little do we tackle that part where actually Chinese mistreat Africans. Chinese look at Africans as people who are under them, where Chinese feel like they are superior to the Africans, where Chinese think that even though we are paying with our resources, we are not so important when it comes to the deals. That's why we have had deals that are sabotaging the economy of Africa, really. So, as we drive through the journey of this discussion, we should bear in mind that for a very long time, Africa has experienced a challenge of discrimination, not only here in Africa but also outside Africa. We have also experienced a discrimination even among ourselves with those who think they have um, you know, a different hierarchy whatsoever. So the story of racial capitalism in Africa is existing typically all over the continent, and this is something that is not a surprise because apparently, uh, according to the way Africa nowadays carries itself in reference to the politics and the social organization, which is a new in this era compared to the previous Africa kind of system where everyone was related to the other. Apparently, it's unfortunate that as we thought that once the world keeps on growing, friendship and love can be is a promising thing. Unfortunately, it is a different story entirely. Hypocrisy, greed, and of course, exploitation loops down to, of course, Africa. Thank you very much, of course, once again, for those who are just joining in. We are broadcasting live from Kampala, Uganda. Africa Maria with my colleague Innosetu. I'll let Innosetu say hi to you guys.
Um, Good evening, everyone that is watching us from different countries, African countries, and of course, European countries. Wherever you are, where you're tuning in, Black Fire Network to YouTube and Black Fire Network radio station, that is Facebook and of course Twitter, Black N1. Wherever you're tuning in, I hope you're doing good. Hope your day's been good. Um, yes, about today's discussion about China and Africa and racial capitalism. Um, China, by the way, in the first few years of the 20th century, W.E.D. W.E.B. Du Bois. Actually, this guy is considered to be one of the pioneers of the Pan-Africanism in Africa. Argued that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. So this problem is about the relation between the dark races and the lighter races. Boys was correct about the problem of racism, but was wrong about two things. He was wrong about this problem of racism being the 20th century and homogenizing the dark races such as the Africans, Indians, and the Chinese as victims of the white racism. So racism has been in existence for many centuries, uh, even before 1903, where when Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, made his famous statement about the color line. African people have been victims of racism for many centuries at the hands of course, the Asiatic, such as the Arabs, Chinese, Europeans, just to name but a few. Asiatic, as people from the continent of Asia have enslaved, exploited, dominated African people for 2,000 seasons. So it is in this sense that the clash of race and civilization is at the heart of the centuries long interaction between African people and the Asiatics. Those are the people from Asia. So debates in international politics and relations are collectively dominated by the ascendancy of China as superpower, while the United States of America is intimidated by this rise of China. Africa in general and South Africa in particular have embraced it by establishing bilateral trade relations which amount to the billions of rands. So South Africa has even joined the BRICS, while the BRICS is a topical issue in relation to the current international economic world order. So there is no consensus about its nature and potential, but it seems to me that BRICS is participating in the neoliberal world order as established by the Euro-American imperialism. There seems to be nothing revolutionary about the BRICS as far as radically changing the imperialism. There seems to be nothing revolutionary about the BRICS, like I said, as far as the radically changing the current Euro-American dominated international economic world order. Both Russia and China, as imperialistic superpowers, are competing to repress Euro-American imperialism on the continent. So Africa, with its wealth of minerals, is converted by these three superpowers as imperialistic in the in the 21st century. China as an imperialistic superpower is spreading its economic tentacles across the continent of Africa. South Africa is a literate with China malls which are controlled by Chinese traders. So these Chinese traders symbolize the second coming of China to South Africa. Chinese indentured laborers were used in the 1990s, 1900 in the mining sector by the white racial capitalists in South Africa. So Chinese traders represent what we call Chinese racial capitalism. So the left in South Africa is like to use the term white monopoly capital to define white racial capitalism, which exploits African people. While this term attempts to, of course, explain the nature and degree of capital accumulation by white settlers in South Africa, it does not provide an, of course, an adequate definition of capitalism as an economic system. So, racial capitalism, as used by Cedric, it is, of course, we see that in the current context of South Africa, we have white racial capitalism and Chinese racial capitalism. So, these Chinese indentured laborers of the 1900s were exploited by the racial capitalism. But the Chinese traders of China malls are agents of the Chinese racial capitalism, which brutally exploits African people, especially migrant workers from Malawi and Zimbabwe. While the Ruperts, and of course the Ruperts are agents of the white racial capitalism. Since the conquest of the indigenous people in 1652, the usage of the term white monopoly capital runs the risk of marginalizing Chinese racial capitalism. Of course, it is no doubt true that white racial capitalism is the primary contradiction, but this does not mean that the only contradiction in South African political economy. So both the whites and Chinese Asiatics rely on racial ideas to establish racialized labor relations. So they have both a long history of civilization and racial superiority complex. It is this long history which informs their racist treatment of Africans who work for them. So whites use term as kafir, while the Chinese prefer the term such as the Hindu to refer African people. The racist history of the term kafir is well known in South Africa. So the Chinese term Hegu, which means black devils, is less known racist name used by Chinese traders in China malls to humiliate, of course, Africans. Just like their white counterpart, just like their white counterpart. Um, The Chinese have a long history regarding treating Africans as animals. We know that. They share with their Asian cousins, namely whites. They double regarding the humanity of Africans. Racial capitalism as a term adequately captures this culture and, of course, civilization superiority of Chinese and whites much better than the term white monopoly capital. White monopoly capital is just a phase of racial capitalism under the dominance of whites, both local and international. So capitalism is not just about the concentration of wealth and the hegemony of course accumulation of accumulation. Race and racism proceed uh, capitalism. So capitalism is a culture and civilization manifestation of an economic system under the racist people such as the whites and Chinese. Africans, especially in Durban, have been victims of Indian racial capitalism for many years. White monopoly capital cannot capture this kind of racial capitalism of the Indians. So Africans are clearly on their own until they restore the land and self-determination, both politically, culturally, and economically. They will remain perpetual victims of agents of racial capitalism such as the whites, Indians, and Chinese. So the so-called China century is also characterized by the problem of color line, except the yellow race is continuing the exploitation of Africans by the white race. So the naive multiculturalism and liberalism of the African race will not save it from the racial capitalism in all its different forms under whites. Indians and Chinese only race first Pan-African socialism can solve the problem of color line. So uh, that is racial capitalism in Africa and most of African countries.
All right. Just like Innocent was saying, actually, Chinese racial capitalism in Africa, this is the intersection of Chinese economic interests, investment practices, and labor dynamics within the context of historical and contemporary racial dynamics on the African continent. We should remember that Chinese engagement in Africa has historical roots, um, dating back to ancient trade routes and diplomatic exchanges, just like Innocent was, of course, explaining. However, the modern era of Chinese investment and economic involvement in Africa um, gained momentum in the late 20th century and accelerated in the 21st century, are driven by the Chinese quest for the natural resources, markets, and strategic influence. Chinese investment in Africa is often characterized by the infrastructure as we know it. But we remember that when they are when we look at the deals that are made with the Chinese and the African, there is a lot of undermining. There is a lot of inferiority, where everyone thinks apparently in Africa is where you ought to make a deal. Africa is a place where you bring your dues and no one will reject. In Africa, actually, we are experiencing a lot of bad leadership in Africa because of a lot of external influences, the fake promises, and all that, and the greed compared with the fake promises combined with the greed the African leaders have, and also the greed that people have for the people outside Africa have for the African continent, leaves Africa in a struggle of course, success and also achieve, success and, of course, living. So apparently, China claims it has a strong relationship with Africa. I've not had a statement that says that Africa has a strong relationship with China. Um, China comes to Africa, does every bullshit they feel like they want to do. They apparently involve themselves even in the smallest scale industries that even the local people can afford. They come and buy land wherever they want. Let's not forget the exploitation of the land degradation, the deforestation, all that kind of stuff they do with too much greed and the need to exploit apparently every living organism on Africa's land. It would be a just right for the Chinese to embrace and also appreciate and respect the Africans that are, of course, in China. But we have the story has been the story has been a little bit different, where apparently we have some of you have seen videos where some Africans are being killed in a mob in China. Where those I remember when COVID-19 broke, when Africans were, of course, kept in an isolation area. They had no food, they had nothing. They were not even allowed to move to stores, purchase anything. We have also seen circumstances where a lot of women, African women, have been raped and killed. And actually, no, the Chinese world in China does not talk about all the things. But I feel like the connection China has with Africa is more of exploiting Africa than actually having Africa's back or having that mutual relationship or connection. Because if at all the people of Africa who are living in China are going through racial discrimination, are going through different segregation, and that China in Africa wishes to have the perfect life, then that is so hypocritical. And I think this should be one thing that we should be looking at. And before we even explore whatever Chinese are doing in Africa, we should look at such kind of things and understand exactly who these people are. Because their action towards the black people in China speaks volume. And I also know very well that the African leaders are not, sorry, they are very aware of these activities. But whatever it is that is holding their hands towards such kind of course, crimes that are being committed against the black people in China, then definitely we are all. It is all about greed. When we look at a country like Congo, I usually talk about Congo because Congo is the number one example of exploitation. Um, because of course it's a wealth and vast, resourceful country. The existence of China in Congo has left actually a deep wound, and it's still digging deeper. We have heard all the struggles that Congo is really going through, but China as a country, or China as the entire nation, is so very quiet about it, which obviously shows that this is not important to them. Whether the Congo people are dying or not, China is ready to keep on mining and digging and exploiting, because this is the biggest basic reason why they are in Africa. I hate the fact when people say there is a relationship. The word relationship is bigger than what apparently we see. So if what is even the thing about Afrca? So, so if you look at how China is treating the African people, well, I may be talking about the issues of African people in China, but let's also look at the issues of African people here in Africa, where we have seen on different videos where Chinese are beating their workers, they are caning them. You are beating grown up people, caning them, and Actually, the child graduation. Yeah, the one that was what I had agaze kugijja n'obudde tebukyera agaze kugijja ogenda sharinga sharinga kyaki njogera nawe ndala tonfaamu
nakugambye tugenda sharinga osiba nayo
edda ngambye zino bbiri sirande kusharinga gundi
mukama we yagamba lekerawo sharing
yagamba mulina sharinga ebyo ebigenda okugalo namugamba tulage ebitattale awo n'agaana ekitegeeza kyayagala tusharinga
post
yeah sorry yeah we're gonna post Phil Williams. Thank you for joining us. We had a little bit of electricity issue. So our electricity, Facebook will get back on together. So our electricity has just I don't know what to say. But yeah, it should happen. But we're back, so doesn't matter. And we've been discussing about China, of course, racial capitalism, China and racial capitalism in Africa. There are a lot of videos that are circulating all over social media. Um, Unfortunately, we can't share the videos. Yeah, uh, but there is a lot that is going on here in Africa, of course, done by the Chinese. Whenever we are looking at the existence of Chinese in Africa, the world usually focuses on the world really focuses on what China is doing. They will tell you that China is developing Africa's infrastructure, transport, is doing good trade, you know, with Africa. The world doesn't explain what Africans are going through in the hands of Chinese on African soil. Last time we tried to share a video, and of course, the channel was put down, and I really don't know the criteria at which videos should be shared. There is this disturbing, like four disturbing videos I came across that have been made recently. Unfortunately, I asked Kit to explain to me like what I should do, but I guess sharing the video isn't the best that is needed on Black Network. So it's gonna be so we're gonna be there's gonna be a little bit verbal. You know, these videos when they're on YouTube, they don't last for a very long time. There is a video of recent actually where they caught a Chinese man who was molesting young African girls. When I talk about young, I'm not talking about African girls who have got boobs or who are teenagers. These are like I should say toddlers because these were kids who were 5, 6. These are I don't know how to term but these are children who were I know this video is gonna be pulled down because there is a certain same instance that happened in Uganda, and this video did not last even a month on YouTube, where a Chinese man was using young girls in Uganda. For him, his preference was using young virgin girls in Uganda, and he was using them. Now wait, like, um, okay, yeah, me look kind of well, but let me explain how it is because I don't know how that one is done. Um, he could there is a blocker, a middleman who could bring these girls from wherever different places, and they put these young girls in one room, and this Chinese man could sexually serve these girls whichever sexual practice that he wanted to do on these girls he did, to the end that how did the people find out all these girls were pregnant, and they actually the mob wanted to kill the Chinese, and the police rescued the Chinese. We expected to see this news running all over the world, and the people who had the videos posted the videos on YouTube, and within a short time, the videos were put down. And this Chinese man he was managing one of the companies. People hardly talk about this Chinese man. The news stopped talking about this. So stop doing that. So actually, a lot of things are going on um, here in Africa, and Sam, what you like? A lot of things are going on here, and the world is not showing what exactly is going on. We usually have Chinese constructing the roads. In the process of the constructions, these people camp in areas for something like even a year, 2, 3, and they have African. They employ some Africans. They employ Africans who are cooks. They employ Africans who are helpers. They employ Africans to do their laundry. They also employ some, few professionals, of course, and guides and stuff like that. And you find that Chinese will, of course, camp in an area for something like 2, 3, 4 years. There is a place where I know Chinese, as you are heading down to the place where the oil mines are, Chinese have camped there for a very, very long time. But wherever Chinese have come to, they always leave a difference for sure. And I don't know if the Chinese are people who do not have discipline at all. When I talk about discipline, uh, I mean in the way someone carries themselves or connect themselves with the outside world. All right. Okay, Jabba. Mm, all right. And so we are not going to mention the Chinese babies because this one everyone knows. We are not so. What is the funniest thing of this all is that Chinese employ Africans to work, and as these Africans are working, they are treated as slaves, really. Recently, I showed you guys, I think like 2 years ago, I showed you a video where a Chinese man was beating up a Ugandan man because he had gone to demand his pay. So the Chinese man was like, I have to pay you whenever I want. You don't need to come here and demand for this pay, or else you leave the company. And was like, it's okay for me to leave, but I need my salary. And they started exchanging blows and throwing blocks at each other. We have seen all this, but China still keeps on signing contracts that are 5 to 6 years in existence in Africa, which actually puts a lot of Africans' lives in danger. When you look at how a Chinese degrades Africa's environment or African natural resources, you will understand that there is more to destroying than construction. Because what is the use of you constructing something when you are destroying the most important thing? What is the use of you building the roads when you are destroying to cause the floods on those very roads that you are constructing? So I feel like China, as that China and their companies, they are more to distracting and destroying Africa's entire system rather than constructing it like they claim. Yes, we are seeing the buildings; they are so very visible, and you know. Uh, they have seen. So no one is going to deny the fact that Chinese have constructed houses, they have constructed roads, companies, factories in Africa. All right. But the biggest question should be, how long are these infrastructures going to last? How strong are these infrastructures? And what happened while these infrastructures were being constructed? What happens on the ground during the construction of these infrastructures? That is also a very important thing, because I feel like peace, freedom matters more than any other thing. And if Chinese cannot give this to the Africans around the places where they are doing this construction, then apparently they don't fit to be in Africa doing whatever it is that they are doing. We um Last time we spoke about all those deals they were signing with African countries, and at the end of that day, Chinese not meeting at the end of their deals. We also quoted where Congo was complaining about China mining its resources and not giving it the passion of what China had agreed to give Congo. So we also know very well the African raw material industries were also complaining of China, not of course supporting the raw material market in Africa, but rather bringing Chinese to produce the same things that Africans are producing. So I feel like China is targeting a more larger thing than construction, than all these it is telling, the world. Jim Jimmy says, even if a person is poor, you don't let a foreigner humiliate and take advantage of you and your women. This is what Jim Jabba says, and I do really agree with you 100%. I feel like African people are experiencing a stereotype issue. Even before the Chinese people start mistreating the African people have already accepted this because apart from now, when we look at the Chinese babies who have grown to 7 to 8, 5 years, you realize that by the time their mothers conceived them, they were still young children. And when you look at the stories of these women, some of them will say, we were forcefully, we were forced into sex. Others will say different stories entirely. Um, but the stakeholders or the government, that actually should be helping these people and protecting these people, at the end of the day sold them out. That's what I should say, because they were not taking their issues so serious. And this is how the China African, babies came, in the picture, because the Chinese realized that the governments of Africa don't really care about their women and about their young children who are being forcefully impregnated by these Chinese people and all that. So that is a sign of weakness of the men over there. That's a comment from K. Williams. All right, K. Williams. I do agree with you too, 100%. So the weakness of Africa still drops back in the stereotype issue that Africans have. I don't know how it is important. I think I've never woken up one time and had it in my mind that I want to have a mixed baby, or I want to date a Mzungu. As I was growing up, actually, because I was exposed to the world of racism. Um, I was exposed to documentaries of, black to white racism. I was exposed to documentaries of course, apartheid policies, genocide, and all that. At a very young age, as I was growing up, I had that. I knew somehow, you know, these people are not good to come close. But the biggest population of Africans, I can guarantee, a dream of everyone, if at all, if at all it's a man, to make sure that he feels big. Definitely, if I have a Mzungu woman, and then I'm gonna be the biggest woman man in my society. And the same story goes to the women in Africa. If I get the Mzungu man, no matter how poor, no matter how old, no matter whatever, if I get that skinned man, I'm gonna represent. And this is the misconception they have in their mind, because they're not exposed to the truth. They don't know what goes around. They don't know how their genes are affected through this. So apparently, I should say a lot of people are ignorant about this marriage, white to black marriage stuff, as much as I wouldn't want to question people's relationship and who they fall in love with. But you waking up and not looking at the factors, but deciding that if I decide to date a white or Mzungu woman, it's a goal for me. If I decide to date a Mzungu man, it's a goal for me. I think this is the issue that is going on, or that is happening all over Africa. And also the story is the same. It comes to the Chinese. All right, so someone sees the Chinese is trying to approach you. Um, Recently I saw a video on TikTok. A Chinese man now, of course, went ahead and married a Ugandan woman, and this Ugandan woman was working in a store, maybe a warehouse or a store, according to her story. I don't know whether it was a store or a warehouse, but um, to cut that story short, according to what she was trying to explain, I felt like this Chinese man decided to date this woman and marry her because he wanted cheap labor. All right. First of all, the woman knew the local language, so she wanted someone who's going to trust, that he's going to trust. So he knew this woman is going to be working tooth and nail to make sure that their company grows, because it is their company. I mean, it is the wife and it is the husband here. So they have to make sure they work hard. So this woman, of course, was put in the warehouse or store. I don't know, but according to what she was saying, I don't know. Maybe it's one of the two. I'm not sure which. She was, of course, communicating with clients, and people were buying at wholesale. And of course, this Chinese man was manufacturing Chinese ready-made clothes down here, and this woman was selling. Now, the biggest question that the biggest trauma that this young woman had was for her years of marriage. Each time she would get pregnant, the Chinese man would actually ask her to abort the baby. Each time she would be pregnant, the Chinese man would ask. Now, little did she know that this Chinese man was married in China. And actually, it was the wife in China who was running the shipments and all that. So she had this young Ugandan woman to work here, thinking that she's working together with the husband and the wife. And the funniest thing, a lot of black women think these are games played by black men. So somebody will say, a lot of people were commenting and saying, wow, we thought it was only Ugandan men who would do that shit. Well, we thought it was only black men who do that shit. So people have that sick mind, that and thinking that the other kind of people is very different. That kind is very different from their own kind. So she couldn't believe actually what she experienced in the hands of this Chinese man, the exploitation as a cheap labor or even a free for free labor because she was working tooth and nail, thinking she's doing the family thing, only to realize that the man was even married in China, and it was the wife even who was heading even this very business this guy had here. But the woman was a partner because I think the guy wanted to have quick license and all that comes along. But the story still looks so terrible. How people think probably the other kind does not betray or stuff like that. Anyway, I'm seeing General Mosquito is right in the building. Hello, Maria and said to just pop in. And thank you so much, General Mosquito. Hello. We hope you're doing good. Thank you for coming through. I guess I've said a lot, so I'll have to let you know to say something too.
So, uh, racism, or because now these people are driving the word of racism to racial capitalism, the Chinese capital, and of course migration in South Africa. We see that in light of the people of the Republic of China reemergence on the African continent since 2000. My dissatisfaction, the intimacies of racial capitalism, Chinese migration and capital in South Africa explores the social, cultural, political, and economic dimensions. So, Chinese migration and capitalism in South Africa, uh, from the indiscriminary approach, of course, grounded in feminist and critical race studies. Uh, uh, we see that in-depth interviews and extensive participants on organizations on different studies about racial capitalism in South Africa and how racial capitalism has been practiced in African countries. We see that Chinese entrepreneurs who chase economic ambitions unsustainable to them in, of course, neoliberalizing in China and emerging markets for low-cost Chinese goods in South Africa and other African countries, and of course, and other African countries. Of course, even in Latin America, we see that while reproducing the enduring social inequalities and power relations foundational to the South Africa's history of racial capitalism and colonialism. The dissatisfaction chronicles not only transitional Chinese livelihoods in South Africa, but also the fraud, intimate and non-intimate, of course, encounters between Chinese and Africans, and the experiences of the precarious South Africans migrate workers at the Chinese mall in South Africa. So it emphasizes the multiplicity of economic forms, effective economies and socialities, the historical contiguities the feminist anthropography of course, racial capitalism. It tracks gender and sexual differences necessary for maximization of profit. Those are Chinese. So the intimacies of racial capitalism are we see that it theorizes gender, like I said, social differences, and of course, contemporary process of racialization and the neoliberal global capitalism across seldom examined yet increasingly important in South Africa's geographic. So, while engaging in racial capitalism, we see that enlightenment goes ahead gender and sexuality among these Chinese in of course in South Africa and other African countries because uh, Chinese goods in African countries they are known to be cheap goods. When you look at besides looking how these Chinese are exploiting Africans, how Chinese are fighting, how Chinese are creating that boundary between Africans. When you talk about racial capitalism, like in today's topic, in a concept is a concept of reframing the history of capitalism as grounded in extradition of course social and economic value from people and marginalized racial identities. Typically, from black people, it is described as the contrast to both for both predecessors and of course successors of black Marxism. I know you know this, Jib Jabba, the making of the Black Radical Transition that was, of course, published in 1983, which is in contrast to both his predecessors and successors. So, theorized that the tradition, all capitalism is inherently racial capitalism, and racism is present in all layers of capitalism. Socio-economic stratification, that is what actually of course, we had in our thumbnails today, that capitalism is thrives of course on equality. Whenever we see racialism, and of course capitalism, it thrives on inequality. There must be a group that is unsatisfied. There must be a group that is enjoying privileges compared to another group. So we see that capitalism can only accumulate by producing and moving through relations of civil inequality among the human groups, and therefore, for capitalism to survive, it must exploit and prey upon unequal depreciation of human value. Prior, we see that scholars such as W.E. Du Bois, you know these guys, had extensively documented that the foundation of industrial capitalism on colonialism and slavery, who also made departures from of course, the Eurocentrism of Marxism. Furthermore, black radicals in American sociology, such as Du Bois and others, established a foundation for academic research on the intersection of racism and capitalism. So, where does this racial capitalism originate from? Someone may ask. Yes, we have seen a lot of European and of course Asiatic countries trying to of course force out this racial capitalism in African countries. We see that racial capitalism um, were of course central to the emerging field of the Black and diasporic African studies. So, wherein new connections were drawn between capitalism, racial identity, and development of disconnected social consciousness. So, that is the discontinuity of interhuman relations in the 20th century. So we see that the development of organization and expansion of capitalist society pursued essentially racial directions, and it could be expected that racialism would inevitably create, of course, ideologies of social structures. So we see that, of course, the basic of discriminatory terms of European feudalism, namely its rigid castle state, and reliance upon multi-generational serfdom. Hence, rather than considering capitalism as revolutionary and radically liberating, as they say that it is argued the inverse of that capitalism did not liberate those in, of course, racially oppressive positions, not did, of course, it abolish feudalism, discriminatory policy practices. Instead, capitalism gives rise to a new world order, as they say. So, while that extent not disconstructed, such as such as, of course, the discriminatory practices, we see that imperialism and genocide, although racial capitalism is not limited to European territories, all those previously under Europe's colonial or imperial rule, it was during Western European 70th century of economic and intellectual flourishing that capitalism and racial exploitation were first linked. Uh, Racial capitalism, according, of course, to Robinson, therefore emanated from the legacy of European civilization. Not, of course, these small groups of people, but the differentiation which led to the racial hallucination and consequently exploitation, spoliation, and, of course, exploitation. So, beginning of the early modern period and reaching its apex during the new imperialism era, racism formed an indispensable weapon in the armory of the state elites, used to contain the class struggles waged by the Sabbathan, of course, population, which appeal to making the system safe for capital accumulation. European colonialism was a large part of driven by the gradual collapse of feudalism, the decline of which was, of course, hastened by events such as the Black Death. So famines and wars in the early as 14th century, such as the decline, created the crisis of capital accumulation, which resulted in class struggles, undermining the feudal system, and many elites gradually looked to colonialism as a way to maintain their wealth and power. The fusion of race and capitalism first materialized in the modern epoch with the advent of the Atlantic slave trade in the late 17th century. Though slavery existed for thousands of years prior to the European colonization of Americas and the subsequent transatlantic slave trade, for example, slavery was widespread in ancient Greece, Rome, and, of course, racism and its convergence with the capital as it is understood today emerged concurrently with European colonialism and slavery in the 17th century. The transatlantic voyages of northern European explorers to the New World, unlike the conquest of or the conquest of the Spanish colonizers, which yielded significant deposits of gold, silver, and other valuable metals, was subsidized primarily through agricultural plantations. We see that a group of enslaved Africans were brought to Virginia, coinciding with the establishment of tobacco farming as a major component of colonial Virginian economy. However, cash crop agriculture in European colonies was serviced chiefly by the white indentured servants in the inception, and it was not until the second half of the 17th century that the substitute was gradually supplanted by the slavery in Europe American colonies. Indentured servants in the Americas, mostly independent or imprisoned Europeans, worked under plantations owner for set period of time, usually for 4 to 7 years before they obtained the status of the free man in America. So as plantations grew in number, workload surged, and, of course, indentured substitute terms expired, which American colonialists searched for more sustainable means of economical and restricted employment to meet growing demand and ever increasing profit quotas. We see that the Barbados Slave Code was signed into law by the colonial legislature, serving as a basis for the slave codes throughout the Americas. On paper, the legislation protected both the slave and enslaver from heinous cruelty. However, in effect, only the latter partly received the lawful security. Enslavers were provided with various methods to keep the enslaved subjugated by the law were profiled legal intervention if slaves pursued retaliation or collective resurrection, whereas the latter was excluded from pursuing legal resource in the case of being a victim of cruelty and maltreatment. We see that in the aftermath of the Beacon Rebellion in 1676, during the multiracial coalition of European indentured servants and African slaves joined forces in the ultimately unsuccessful revolt against the Virginian governor Sir William Buckley. So, racial stratification emerged to prevent future mixed race alliances in the colony by giving privileges to European servants and stipulating that all African slaves brought to Virginia were considered chattel. So the colonial authorities created a system to separate out different races with the laboring population using color as sorting mechanism by the 1680s. So the categories of the white and black had emerged, supplanting previous distinctions of nationality or religion. So, Atlantic world slavery developed the racialized conception of property in several ways, especially in the United States. One such way was through classifying people in the property scheme. Specifically, property ownership was dependent on race, and only white men maintained the right to own, of course, the property. Property was included by the white and non-white men alike. Whiteness for the property owning subset of the white men therefore enabled ownership of property along the insulation from the threat of becoming property own self under the yoke of the chattel slavery. So the subject to its brutal practices, slaves and by the extension men and women of color more broadly were of course dehumanized. I of course for example reduced to subhuman status. During the Victorian era, waves of migration to Western Europe and North America occurred, typically from groups preying a perpetuation of all famine at home, such as the Irish Catholics escaping Great Famine and Jewish immigrants fleeing from Russian pogroms. So once they arrived, these immigrants were frequently racialized as foreign others and forced into scurried working conditions as part of the rapidly expanding urban proletariat. However, through the process of cultural assimilation, such as immigrant groups were eventually considered by wider society as white, granting them social mobility in the capitalistic system denied to other marginalized groups. So when you look at modern racial capitalism has been, of course, seen as the core of many issues involving racial inequality, including environmental justice issues, the disappropriatement of impacts of COVID-19, as well as the South African apartheid and Israel Palestine conflict. So, recent work has also extended, of course, conversations like, for example, racial capitalism to data and capital generated through the use of digital applications and platforms. So, for socialist market, we see that it is said that racially hierarchical political economy constituting war and militarism, imperialism, accumulation and exploitation by domination and labor super exploitation. Further, La said that racial capitalism is rooted in the intersection of anti-blackness and anti-radicalism. So, but then we see that anti-blackness reducing blackness to, of course, categories of different works in environment. For example, businesses. A lot of actually writers have written about racialism, this racial capitalism among African countries, and a lot of people warned about Africa about this racial capitalism. However, in Africa, like apart from South Africa, but we see even other African countries where we see a lot of whites competing business wise with Africans, but it is seen so much in South Africa. But a lot of writers warned about this. For example, the voice warned Africa about this kind of stuff that might happen in the future of Africans. So we see that anti-radicalism, it is just a repression and condemnation of and capitalistic or of course or left-leaning ideas of politics, practices, and modes of organizing that are constructed as sub Seditions and others related to capitalistic societies in African countries. So, a lot of injustices happening. You happening. Said is Maria holding you hostage. Yeah, I love your enemy. BS, which it's against the laws of power. It's not your enemy. I seek hearing about black people suffering globally. Wake up, people. Exactly, Juba. That is why they close that one love. Yes, yes. That just clear on the radio from your conscript. Yeah, these other races are not black people friends. They are out of take care, family and Maria. You snacks if you are big pray fast.
My snack. Yeah, my soul is shelters. Every day is okay. Because I don't know someone related to for
So we see that South Africa, the intersection of Chinese capital and migration has significant implications within the framework of racial capitalism. So Chinese capital in South Africa, we see that since the emergence, like I said, of the People's of the Republic of China on the African continent around 2000, Chinese capital has been played a prominent role in South Africa. So um, we see that China's capital in South Africa represents the emergence from the 21st century racial capitalism and empire. So it operates through neoliberal modes such as flexibility, mobility, and risk taking, while also producing racial difference among South Africans. So aspiring Chinese entrepreneurs seek economic opportunities in the emerging markets of low-cost Chinese goods in South Africa, across Africa, and across other countries. So when we look at like racial capitalism through though primarily discussed in, of course, in context in very many by very many scholars, we see that apartheid in South Africa, as well as the ongoing Arab-Israel conflict, has been attributed to racial domination and capital accumulation. So they we see that capitalism, accumulation of dispossession and coercive labor regimes, so which constitute strategies implemented by the settler colonial powers in South Africa and of course Palestine stroke Israel. So Ramo also say we see that we see that expulsions, brutality, and complicity in the global economy in the explaining that global capitalism total operates through the logic of expulsion that increasingly disposes people of jobs. So homes, lands, and of course welfare benefits. Dispossession of racially devout people's land and resources is a constant racialized process of capital accumulation and forms of labor exploitation such as slavery, sharecropping, indentured servitude, debt coinage on convict labor, and sweet shops are also integral cost features of capitalism. Moreover, racial capitalism, racial capitalists, of course, racialized neoliberal capitalism was of course framed as a crucial to decolonization by facilitating the decolonization of South African state and the development of an independent Palestinian state. However, in reality, from we see that a lot of people argue that this structuring has led to partial decolonization in South Africa, which is not true, and the continuation of sexual colonialism in Palestine and Israel. So a re-articulation of course relationship between race and class within context of expanding inequality and racialized poverty and an increasing reliance on violence to police the racialized poor and secure the powerful. In South Africa, if at all, most especially that place, that Chinese mall, if at all we see Chinese, if at all we see Chinese, not even in South Africa, uh, the cheapest goods we see in African countries, these are Chinese goods. Uh,
All right, Carol. Thank you for, of course, being here with us.
when we look at the list, of course, the list, Chinese people provide, of course, low priced goods to African people. and at the time is these goods they are of course of low standards. We know that they're always of low standards, and this has created these people to gain a lot of profits in this, because if at all they can sell goods cheaply, these people are owning land. This thing, and in South Africa, it goes worse into like these people owning everything in South Africa, making South Africans slaves on their own land, like people working for these Chinese and other races in South Africa. So capitalism, as of course as an ideology, it is based on capital accumulation. Whenever it is, of course, it is put somewhere, it is based on accumulating of capital. So racism, like I said, racism thrives on inequality. So these people fight so hard to create inequality so that they can achieve profits. They can accumulate a lot of capital, a lot of profits out of this inequality they create. The poor and of course the rich, they create that kind of inequality for someone to possess land, other people don't possess land, for them to of course to monopolize businesses in African countries alongside the African people. Now, how are African people going to elevate themselves if these people, if at all these Chinese, they are everywhere, they are monopolizing every business in African countries?
I'm trying to understand.
You can do that.
Racial capitalism actually, like you said, it's all about making profit and all that. We should know that racial capitalism, of course, is about stealing intellectual property, creating low wage labor, alienation, and the culture for fear and scarcity. Um, this has been really exercised, with more especially, I don't know with the other people, but since you're always here to talk about the black people, well, is what I'm going to talk about. So when we look at Africans, when we look at racial capitalism, I'm going to also give you another example of the Africans we have working in Arab countries in different fields. We have got drivers, we have got housemates, we have got delivery boys, we have got sales girls and sales boys. We've got people working in different fields, and if you still see what they're going through and the environment they are living in, this is a typical example of racial capitalism. And for a very long time, I think as racial capitalism focuses on gaining profits on the expense of the workers, on the expense of course, the standards of living, and also giving little wages to the laborers and giving them high, uh, of course, duties, labor duties to carry out. We realize that there are some people, more especially the Africans in the Arab countries who are working now, who don't even have the day, they don't have a day off. They work around the clock. They don't have weekends. They're working all the time, and the same story still goes on. I feel like of recent we have got a lot of employers who actually exploit employees in and out, and it's a little bit absurd. But when I look at an environment where employers exploit employees, and again it's become so very, it would be, I don't want to use the word understandable, but I wouldn't blame, because for a very long time we have seen those other kinds, mistreating other people, black people. But it would be a pity, and it's still a pity to those who end up again doing the same to their fellow black people. Um, we have seen scenarios actually. I think the world has been made to believe that it's okay for you to mistreat another person as long as you are superior. We have even seen some videos circulating on Facebook, TikTok, and other social media platform where apparently I saw this video where this woman went out, I think, to eat with the family, the children, and the maid of the children was, had to sit at the corner on a different chair, and she was facing a different direction because she's a maid. She cannot sit on the same table with you know, she's a maid. She can't sit on the same table with her boss and the children, and she cannot eat out because definitely she's being paid salary or whatever it is. So I don't know what, but this is the kind of society that was designed to make people think they are so superior over others. There is that superiority complexion that runs in the mind and in our day to day activities all over the world. And this is racial capitalism, really, because this is what racial capitalism brings. You think there is racial discrimination, there is that class discrimination, there is that political discrimination, there is hierarchy, there's discrimination within hierarchies. So this has dug to the depth of the roots of Africa, which is actually a painful thing because throughout history we did not have such kind of things in Africa, though we had people who were, of course, of course, we had people who were this community service began in Africa, where people who used to commit crime would go and do community service. They start doing stuff if they are not and they're not paid. At times they're just given a little allowance and stuff like that. So when people still look at that article, they will say Africans were having other slaves and stories like that. Anyway, back to the topic. We have had people experience this, even among ourselves as black people. And this is how the society has designed people to believe and think maybe when you behave inhumanly, then you are showing a certain class. When you behave inhuman, then you are definitely a higher class, which I feel like is not right to me. If at all you are looking at I'm going to compare this domestic life to what exactly is going on in Africa now when it comes to the resources of Africa. If at all, uh, if at all someone who feeds your children, who makes food for you when you're not around, who bathes your children, takes care of them, gives bottles your baby each time they're crying, changes their diaper, cleans your house, cooks food. That person is capable of even, by the way, poisoning you after all. And if at all this person can do all this with their bare hands, because and at the end of that day, this person cannot be treated equally. They are not allowed to sit next to the children with whom they even take to bed and a pamper to sleep, so they cannot get close. I feel like there is a lot of hypocrisy and maybe.
bwe bamwoganira n'akaaba tebasobola musitula. So um, racial capitalism, like Maria said, just said, when we look at these Africans in, of course, China, the Chinese in Africa, inequalities and social identities and well-beings, of course, we see that the relationship between China and Africa and African nations have intensified the following they, of course, the ratification of several multilateral and bilateral developmental agreements, especially after the third forum of China Africa Cooperation for SACO summit in 2006. So, in the past decade, the relations have transcended to the micro level with important implications for households and individuals. So, of note are the varying forms of population migration between the two places for reasons ranging from business ventures, education, asylum seeking, and family making and reunification. So, using various primary and secondary data, of course, we see that in a special issue evolve into the well-being, social identities, and of course different kinds of social, culture, and economic inequalities of Africans in China and Chinese in Africa. Although we see that the policies and mechanisms to ensure decent living conditions, enhanced sense of belonging, and social equity among Africans in China and Chinese in Africa. So, um, China relations have a long history dating back in 1950s, and very many people actually like they look at Chinese posing their relationship with Africa in the early 2000s, which is not true. So the relationship between China and Africa dates back to the 1950s. So the relations, however, are intensified at the turn of the century, especially after the third FOSAC summit in 2006. So, which culminated China's decades-long efforts to engage with Africa. However, over the years, the relations between China and Africa have grown exponentially, particularly in areas of political and economic development. Indeed, China has since 2009 became Africa's largest trading partner with the trade volume between the two rising from, of course, $10 billion in 2000 to, of course, $185 billion by 2018. Therefore, we see that historically dwelling on economic and political dimensions of China-Africa relations, a critical engagement with current media and academic debates points to several silent dimensions of China-Africa relations, including including the political economy approaches to examine China's role in Africa, comparative analysis approaches comparing China's engagement with Africa, vice versa, others establishing emerging power. So, a final dimension, we see that which squarely describes the reason for the issue relating to migration, human flows, or people-to-people engagement. So, estimates show that over a million Chinese currently reside and ply different trades in several African countries. Similarly, thousands of Africans live in Chinese cities or regions including Guangzhou, Yui, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and others. So, the Africans in Chinese cities include people seeking education, business people, or traders, economic migrants, and asylum seekers. So, especially in Hong Kong, while we see that the number of African traders in China may be decreasing, so their representation is kept intact by the rising numbers of student populations. Recent figures show that the proportion of Africans studying in China has been growing for more than over regions in the past decade. The growing numbers in both temporal and permanent migrations between the two settings have aroused interest in the lives of the people involved. So, correspondingly, we see that China Africa studies is of course increasingly evolving. So the special issue presents a collection of articles that together delve into the complicated lives of Chinese and African migrants between the two places as regards their well-being, socio-economic inequalities, and social identity. So by focusing on these issues, we place emphasis on the micro level of China Africa engagement by illuminating in terms of diverse and fine grained human dimensions of China and Africa relations. So, this is a significant contribution to the growing literature and marked departure from dominant macro international relation debate. So, when we look at the largely rooted in realistic and liberal theoretical and ideological perspectives, these perspectives often discuss China's rise in geopolitics and its implication. China threats versus pose possibilities of win-win outcomes for Africa without necessarily paying attention to the human dimensions in China-Africa engagement. So, when you look at inequalities, social identities, well-being, China-Africa relations, and of course, racial capitalism, matters relating to well-being, social identities, and inequalities among migrant and minority groups have attracted attention globally, with the rise of populism and ultra-nationalism. Migrants often grapple with social, cultural, and economic challenges, e.g., social marginalization, racism, and low access to essential services, which put them at the disadvantage in their new societies and usually affect their social mobility adversely. In the context of China-African relations, these challenges sometimes stem from unbalanced politically driven policies, for instance, in areas of education, which can incite variants of asymmetrics for people who endeavor to take advantage of what? Eh? The bag. Which bag? So, um, like asymmetries for people who endeavor to take advantage of the potential benefits of the corporation. So these factors can endanger the ideal state of being that people and policymakers seek by focusing on the multifaceted concepts of well-being, social identities, and inequalities among migrants between China and Africa. We are able, of course, to explore political concepts and theories such as people-to-people engagements and social network resilience, access to healthcare, diaspora space, and racism and discrimination. So, given the different disciplinary focus on, of course, very many things concerning well-being, social inequalities and social identities are used loosely in the introduction. So, they are operationalized different in each other. When we look at well-being, we refer to the dynamic objective and perceived experiences and the living condition challenges and opportunities that affect the people's state of being either diversely or positively. So social identity donates complexities in a person's self-definition in a given social cultural context relative to the perception of expectations of others in the same social group. So moreover, issues of well-being and social identities correlate with existing actual and perceived social inequalities. These inequalities describe patterns of difference among populations in terms of advantages and disadvantages they have, usually along the lines of social class, social status, and power. So, and a share and is shaped by the person's economic condition, race, ethnicity, gender, physical and social environment. So linguistic competences and education attainment. For instance, uh, when we look at when we look at some of the researches that have been made, Guangzhou is signaled a correlation between being an African in China and well-being. So participants, we see that conscious creation of social networks to carve a suitable social status for themselves amidst precarity, therefore by confronting the concepts of well-being, social inequality, and of course, social identities within broader discourse of China-Africa relations. They are the issue, we see that the issue comprises of the multidisciplinary topics relating to health, education, and social politics, economic history, culture studies among the people of African being in Africa. So when we look at secondly the relationship between China and Africa, it has, of course, given both cooperation and tension, and we see a lot of tensions now coming out in African countries between these China relations in African countries. So the racial tension and exploitation, incidences of racial tension between Chinese communities in Africa and local populations have been reported. For example, in 2018, a Chinese motorcycle dealer named Liu was deported from Kenya after being caught on video using derogatory language towards Kenyans. So more recently, we see a Chinese national named Lu was deported from Malawi for exploiting African children. Lu K filmed these children reciting phrases in Mandarin unaware of their meaning. So the videos were then sold on Chinese social media platforms where the children uh, unwittingly referred to themselves as black monsters with low IQs. Can you imagine? So such incidents have sparkled outrage and reunited discussions about racial dynamics between Chinese settlers and African communities. Additionally, Chinese traders in Africa, particularly those operating in China malls, have been accused of exploiting African people, especially migrant workers from countries like Malawi and Zimbabwe. This exploitation is seen as a form of Chinese racial capitalism. So dependence on raw materials is also another tension China is creating in African countries amidst racial capitalism that is seen in very many African countries. However, it is so much in South Africa per now. So Chinese engagement has reinforced some African countries' dependence on raw materials and unskilled labor. So, joblessness in certain industries, such as textiles, Chinese imports have led to loss of manufacturing jobs. So, debt and corruption. High levels of debt, economically unviable decisions, and official corruption have been associated with Chinese investments. So it is essential to reorganize that the interactions between China and Africa are complex and cannot be, of course, oversimplified. While some criticize Chinese policies, the narrative of colonization doesn't, of course, capture the entire story. So so like I always say, um, like I always like I always say, Africans are we too stupid to realize um what Chinese are doing, what other people, what what Europeans, what Asians, Asiatics are doing in Africa. Are we too stupid to realize all these blunders, all these things these people have made in Africans? Are we too blind to see the scars these people have made on African soil? Besides the raw materials they have taken, they have not given up on everything in African countries, even the businesses. Now, these people are shifting even to businesses. Like some, we find a Chinese national creating a small scale business. They are, they are selling like they are selling their goods cheaply. These are low standardized goods. Like our presidents in African countries, is it that not even president, are we too stupid as Africans to realize what's going on in Africa, to realize what what these people have brought to Africa? Because like very many people like there is a way they look at alien people in Africa, and when you like when you have that white, should I say, that white face, Africans, can't we wake up? For me, I always say that it's not too late for we to Africa it's not too late for Africa to wake up, stand for what belongs to we. Um, it's not too late for we to, of course, wake up because like if at all these people cover the entire area, the entire African soil, what are we going to be left with? What Africa is going to be left with what? If at all they are taking everything, if at all even the businesses, like we would have of course we would have of course done. It is done by these people. So what do we like? I don't know. I don't know how I can. I don't know how I can phrase this, but all we need is to wake up as Africans. We shouldn't be shy about what belongs uh, uh, to us. So, so someone would ask, when we look at capitalism and racism, these two people support each other. The capitalism and racism, these two things at times work in hand. So racism is so applied in US prison statistics and policy to data on differences in unemployment, housing, wealth, and income distribution. So college enrollment, film awards, and so much more. So and to hardening as hostilities towards the migration. At the same time, racism is so often condemned. At least in the mainstream media, dominant political circles, and most intellectual and academic institutions, racism persistence where the capitalist economic system prevails raises the question of the connection between racism and racism. We see that many societies are structured and operate to subordinate one or more portions of their populations, particularly culturally, economically, or in combination of these two ways. So, while privileging others among of the successive generations born into societies with such subordinations. Some will challenge and seek to change their condition. Force can try to maintain subordination, but it is costly, dangerous, and often unsuccessful. So, the preferred method has rather been to develop an idea that justifies the subordination and to install the idea as deeply as possible into thinking of both subordinated and privileged. So, one such idea is race, the notion that sets of inherent, often deemed natural qualities differentiate groups of people from one another in fundamental ways. So, this idea of race can be then be used to explain the subordination of some and privileges of others as effects of their own racial differences. The concept of race thus comprises of a reversal instead of being produced idea and exposed justification of structures of the social subordination. Race morphisms, we see that instead into some pre-existing reality that caused by or enabled the subordination. We know how and why racism worked often to support slavery around the world, and especially in the early United States. Masters endorsed and promoted ideas that justified slaves as subordinated because they were an inferior race. So, racist ideology also sometimes is supported by feudalism by dividing lords and serfs into different races. Indeed, some early capitalist system likewise racially distinguished employers from employees. So, racism persists in no small part because its benefits to capitalism outweigh its costs. However, capitalism uh, presents a more complex case because it is often made individual freedom central to its supportive ideologies. Opponents of slavery could use the ideology to fight the slavery abolition, yet capitalism history nevertheless keeps of course exhibiting both the idea of race and racism. And the evidence of marshaled by, among others, Manning Marable in how capitalism underdeveloped Black American certainly documents capitalism in subordination of many African Americans. Do racism and capitalism then support one another as per Malcolm X's famous statement? Uh, you can't have, of course, you can't have capitalism without racism. Should we fall Adolf read his perspective in his new Labor Forum article, we see that Marx race and neo-liberalism, it seems racism as a historical specific ideology that emerged, took shape and has evolved and, and evolved as a constituted element with capitalism. So, answers to these questions emerge from patterns exhibited by capitalism's inequality and instability. So, capitalists never could end their system's tendency to generate gross inequality in wealth and economic distribution, nor its instability. So, in cycles of this of depression and recession, both those features of capitalism have contributed to the ongoing social injustice and oppositional social movements. Had the heavy burdens of recurring business cycles, periodic unemployment, and its multiple consequences been described distributed roughly equally or randomly across societies where capitalism prevailed. threatening and of course frightening everyone. Those oppositional movements might well have gathered the broad support needed to consign capitalism to an array dismiss. However, some burdens were never distributed equally or randomly. Some suffered them disproportionately and repeatedly, resulting in social subordination. Others were relatively privileged, exempted from those burdens partially or totally. Yet, in their struggles to displace slavery and feudalism as societies prevalent to pre-capitalistic economic systems, supporters of capitalism had often promised that it would differ from those systems by guaranteeing everyone liberty, equality, and brotherhood or solidarity. What capitalism achieved contradicted that promise. So the burdens of capitalism is instability fell much harder on employees than employers and much harder upon some employees than others. So capitalism thus always faced a basic legitimation problem. However, could it justify its unequal distribution of income, wealth, and the burden of its systemic instability among the people whose condition of being free and unequal? So, capitalism was supposed to guarantee one of uh, uh, the major means of managing this legitimation problem has been an ideology of race, alongside other ideologies centered around the concepts such as the productivity and meritocracy. Capitalism repurposed race and racism by dividing human beings conceptually and particularly into intrinsically different subgroups. Capitalism's defenders could explain that, justify why its economic benefits, e.g., for example, the status of the employer rather than the employee, and the burden of unemployment and poverty were so unequal distributed both within the countries and globally. So employers, politicians, academics, and of course journalists reinforced that the notion that the cause, fault, or blame for the unequal distribution lay with racially differentiated characteristics, not with the capitalistic system. Certain population groups conceived as races were deemed underdeveloped, incapable, irrational, and of course physiologically disqualified in relation to capitalism's productive rigors, such as presumed inferiority, was then offered as an explanation for why people of some races were rarely employers and among employees were those last hired and first fired, poorly paid, and ghettoized. Such races, often non-whites, were in effect assigned to play the role of shock absorbers in and for capitalistic business cycles. They still are, by the way. We see that uh, uh, lost the crisis of the jobless and out of the school teens and the young adults in Chicago, Illinois, and the US using the racialized differentiation of documents. How young people of the color in the United States continue to face significantly higher rates of unemployment and lower unemployment per population ratios than young white people do. In the US, most actually white employees have been spread, uh, constantly fearing and periodically suffering unemployment and its consequences. A minority of white employees shares the fate sorry of a huge portion of the shock absorber races. That fate comprises job insecurity, recurring unemployment and its consequences, loss of skills, job connections, and promotions. So descent into hopelessness and this separation, turning towards illegal revenue generating activities, policed into the appropriate net incarnation etc. by of course concentrating both poverty and business cycle shock absorber role in certain subgroups of their populations, and by using racism to explain that concentration capitalistic societies manage the risk attending their tendencies to gross inequality and instability. Some conversations and right wingers further legitimate capitalism by reframing their racism for them. The problem is that capitalism has not been allowed to work its healing magic. Market discipline upon those inferior groups, misguided social protections, minimum wages, safety nets, welfare, for example, have kept them inside a culture of poverty, defined as recurring unemployment, poverty, social isolation, family instability, incarnation. A case in point by collecting or, of course, removing those misguided and, of course, counterproductive social protections, and, of course, capitalism disciplines would integrate them into prosperity and growth. That this has not happened for most subordinate groups is blamed on the depth of their racialized inferiority and or the legacy of liberal imposition of the culture of poverty. In contrast, liberals and social democrats who accept the concept of race have mostly sought to ameliorate the suffering of the unemployed, the poor, by policies such as education, welfare, training, such as policy likewise rarely succeed there generally or enduring. They could not overcome the system of reproduction of poverty and unemployment and imposition of them, of course, this proportionally on the shock absorber races. Both conservatives and liberals have reinforced a shaped denial of the mechanism of mutual support between capitalism and racism. Of course, capitalism is not the only cause of all sorts of racism, but ignoring or minimizing its role on perpetuates of racism by this designating some members of the society to be shock absorbers of the recurring business cycles. The capitalist system creates legacies of trauma and inequality that can accumulate into dysfunctional qualities for its victim. There is neither need nor warranty to take those qualities as given, nor to transform them into racialized attributes. The solution is rather to treat those legacies as among the profoundly unacceptable consequences and costs of capitalism, profoundly the, of course, divisive inequality and instability. A capitalism that perpetuates itself via racism incurs huge self-protection costs to police and imprison or to provide some safety nets for its shock absorber races or varying combination of both. When capitalists shift some or all these costs into the tax obligation of workers, more social tensions emerge. Workers are then told their tax payments must compensate for their deficiencies attributed to the shock absorber races rather than the structural irrationalities of the capitalism. Racial conflicts then preclude or tear apart working class political unity. Racism persists in no small part because its benefit to, of course, capitalism outweigh its cost, or at least those costs capitalists have to bear. When capitalists and their ideology supporters disavow racism, they carefully ignore capitalism as a key part of the problem. They keep the point is like instead of the intolerance of some people who lack compassion for these less fortunate, thereby they further divide the working class in effect into one race that cannot or will not work hard, and it's therefore unemployed and poor, and another race that lacks compassion in comparison to capitalists. Their supporters congratulate themselves for their superior morality. Capitalism thus comes full cycle. Its supporters use the benefits from racism, who practice the consequences they blame exclusively on others, but never capitalism itself.
Hello. How's it
Damn jibber jabber, you on both shows, ain't you? You in it with the Mora and you in it with
going?
so what's the discussion, people? What we talking about?
China in Africa and the racial capitalism.
China and Africa and what?
Racial capitalism.
Oh, racial capitalism. Okay. Okay. All right, continue. I'm gonna stay long. Just see you guys were live. So I popped it. I was at the Moorish show. He ended. So I come in here and see Jibber Jabber. Jibber Jabber, you in both shows. Shit, how the hell you doing that? We over there talking about cryptocurrency, how to invest, how Africans should invest in crypto. And you over here with Maria and them talking about the Chinese and economics. So
Jim Jabba was here. He said maybe he was on both shows. It's possible.
he was on both shows. I just left him on the other show. We were conversating in the chat room and the crypto guy. We talking about the crypto. Got a lot of scamming Negroes in Kenya talking about crypto. They trying to scam people. I said, be careful with these scamming ass Africans. There's always some kind of scam going on. Kenyans almost as worse as Nigerians with their scams and shit.
Sure. Sure.
You know, I tried to tell them the story when Maria went to Nairobi. They scammed her out of her shoes. Maria went all the way back to Uganda without no shoes on. I told her you went back to Kampala without no shoes. Just had your socks because they scammed you. They scammed you in Nairobi out of your shoes. Listen here, beautiful sister. You don't need your shoes. I do need my shoes to walk around on. No, you don't. In Kenya, the land of the gods. As you know, this number Maria's back on the bus in Kampala, nothing but the socks on. Hey, where your shoes at? They scammed me out of my shoes in Kenya. Damn.
But anyway, I think scammers are everywhere. Sorry about
That's how that's how I said to his mama go. Said you get ready for these solar eclipse, right? You get ready to take all your money to the preacher, right? April 8th, April 8th. Your mama wants all that money going to the preacher. It's the solar eclipse. Get ready to take all your money over there. She don't want to hear nothing you got to say. Hey, can you imagine what Setro's mom gonna do that now that Putin told the world that Jesus was black? What's Setro's mom gonna do with that white Jesus on the walls, Maria? And Putin said all the ancient figures of the Bible are all black. I knew they were all black. You know, it's made up because it comes from African spirituality. But Putin said, oh, that Jesus was black. And he's only doing that because he wants to ingratiate himself with Africa. You know, Africans' minds and stuff. Putin said Jesus is black. Putin's our friend. We can give him all our resources. Putin, what do you want? I want all your gold, nigga. I want all your uranium, nigga. I want all your cobalt, nigga. You had it. Here you go. Here go your black Jesus. Put him on your wall. Thank you, Putin. Thank you. Thank you. You can have all my shit. I just need to know there was a black Jesus. Thank you, Putin. Oh, that's right, nigga. Ain't this black Jesus on your wall? Take down the white Jesus, put the black one on. But now that I told you, I need all your gold, all your cobalt, all your coltan, all your diamonds. I need all your shit, all of it, all of it. You can have all of it, Putin. You told me that Jesus was black. You told me Jesus was black. You can have all my shit, Putin. Thank you, nigga. Thank you. Everything's all right with the world. I'm still hungry. I still ain't got no money, but I know Jesus is black. Oh, yes. Oh. You guys got it. Go ahead.
Alright. Um, so, guys, as we well, Innocent was of course driving you through this the history of racial capitalism as I'm talking about the existence of racial capitalism as of to date, and I guess for those who have been with us, we've been trying to compare the two. And as I was talking about how it is exercised in the present day, he was trying to take us through how it began throughout history. Since today's topic is about China, I elaborated more on how a lot of black people have suffered in the hands of China, and yet China goes ahead and says that it has a strong relationship. Actually, it also extends and says it has a good relationship with the Africans, which I find so hypocritical because we know there is no good relationship with the Chinese because we have seen a lot of Africans living in China going through a lot. And also, we've seen the humiliation China has caused on Africa uh, within their stay here, and they're still doing the same. Actually, um, there is a visible of a discrimination on between the on the land between the Chinese and the African people. The work discrimination we have got as wage or salary discrimination. We have seen hierarchy or racial discrimination. We have experienced the exploitation, which also falls still in the racial capitalism. We have seen how Chinese have exploited apparently, how Chinese have exploited apparently everything, and they are still doing so here in Africa. I'll still take you through. We have had labor Chinese investment in Africa, which have implications for labor dynamics, including employment practices, working conditions, and labor rights. A Chinese company often bring in Chinese workers for specialized roles, leading to concerns about the displacement of local workers and exploitation of cheap labor. So this still falls in the racial capitalism and how Chinese are exercising this. Um, they are bringing Chinese workers who can even do the smallest thing. that who are doing the smallest things that even Africans can still do. So, and when it comes to African, their payment is just very low compared to the Chinese workers, and this is definitely racial capitalism. And let's not forget that we have also seen labor abuses, including long hours, low wages, and unsafe working conditions in Chinese owned enterprises. Of course, rising questions about the social impact of Chinese investments in Africa. And then let's not forget the Chinese investment in Africa, which is often characterized by infrastructure development projects and resource extraction deals, where Chinese companies are involved in building roads, railways, ports, and other infrastructure projects across the continent, often financed through loans or aid packages from the Chinese government. Additionally, the China demand for African minerals, oil, and other natural resources, of course, which does not equal or equate to the whatever they have given the African. And we can still recall on Democratic Republic of Congo when they had a juncture about, of course, the deal they made with the Chinese. Until now, the Chinese are still extracting, but the people of Congo have never received what the Chinese promised them. So we have seen the ratio, of course, this racial capitalism being exercised here. Let's not forget land acquisition. We know very much that Chinese investment in Africa, in African agriculture and agribusiness, has led to land acquisition and agricultural projects in several countries. Large scale land deals have raised concerns about land grabs, displacement of local communities, and environmental degradation. The critics argue that these projects often prioritize profit over local livelihoods and contribute to social inequalities and conflicts over land rights. This is very visible all over Africa and extremely visible in Uganda. Last time I was trying to explain to you that as a Ugandan, you are not allowed to settle in the wetlands. You're not allowed to clear the wetlands. But we have seen several Chinese settling in wetlands, clearing the wetlands, and of course, constructing factories and other permanent residents for the Chinese, which actually still leaves a question mark in my mind like, what is the difference of a Chinese settling in a wetland and an African settling in a wetland? Why are Africans not allowed to do so? Which I do agree, disturbing nature or exploiting nature is something that I would not agree with. But again, what is it? Why is it that the Chinese are allowed to do this? And when it comes to the Chinese, they are so greedy when it comes to exploitation, both the land and the minerals and the people existing in Africa. So, this is a typical impact of racial capitalism that is being exercised by the Chinese on Africa's soil. Let's not forget the Chinese investment in Africa, which has environmental implications, including deforestation, pollution, and habitat destruction associated with resource extraction and infrastructure development projects. Environmental degradation can have diverse effects on local communities, ecosystems, and biodiversity, exhibiting social tension and conflict over natural resources. We have seen this very well in Kenya, where apparently the forests the trees have been cut down in various forests, and Chinese are taking, the trees. Let's also look at the railway that was constructed in Kenya, where the Chinese were caught, of course, stealing ivory in the game park. So they don't really, China has this, but they don't exploit their own. So you come to Africa to disturb the ecosystem and everything that is living in Africa. We have seen, of course, Chinese. Have you ever seen a Chinese do that fish stuff? Oh, they go over with them, and they are very dirty. But anyway, they have carried out things mercilessly. You know, when you have come to be in a place temporarily, and probably what they would do in China, they are doing here now. They want to preserve China's resources, China's vegetation, China's forest, all the ecosystem in China. They want to, of course, preserve their natural resources, their vegetation, the environment in China. So, where do they choose to destroy? They decide to come down to destroy the environment in Africa, and we have seen this so visible. Now, some critics argue that China's economic engagement in Africa involves a form of debt diplomacy, where African countries accumulate unsustainable levels of debt to finance Chinese-led infrastructure projects. Debt dependency on China can limit Africa's countries' fiscal sovereignty, exhibit economic vulnerability, and contribute to long-term indebtedness. Back home, Mr. So, let me Professor Gabela Gandu. So these we have seen all this. So how if at all Africa is to make a business deal with the China, deals are made when it comes to economics. Deals are made when it comes to businesses. Making a deal is a way of developing. So if at all, why are they banning? If you're making a deal, if making a deal is a key to prosperity, it is usually fine. But which kind of deal are you making? And is this deal an advantage to both parties? But at the end of the day, Africa makes deals with China, and the only side that benefits from these deals is, of course, China. And China knows. China puts down, you know, uh, puts Africa to the wall. And of course, the China are always high that Africa cannot reach. The demands that China puts on this debt and the infrastructure that is giving to Africa is undespicable. And like I said before, we have never seen Africa giving in. Sorry, we have never seen China giving Africans hard cash. Like now, Africans have received, let me say, $3,500 billion or whatever amount of money for a certain project. China doesn't do that because they don't have the money. They do not value Africa to even give them that cash. So they go ahead with their fake deals and do their fake bullshit shit, and with their constructions that don't in Africa pay a whole lot of money to the Chinese, of course, to make sure that these Chinese constructors are building. Last was it like 2 weeks ago, we were here with INNOSSETU. We let you guys know something which is very weird, that Uganda has one of the most expensive roads in the entire world. You can imagine that. You cannot even look at the road and then be like, I don't know why it's the most expensive road. But of course, it's a road that is still and being built by the Chinese. Now you can imagine Uganda having the most expensive road in the entire world. Now you can look at the conspiracy, you can imagine the hypocrisy, you can imagine the stupidness that is going on. Because which kind of road, by the way? You cannot even compare that road to roads. What? So you can see the deals that people are making. So the China as a country goes ahead, gives the architectural designs to the Ugandan government and promise them, and they are so excited. We saw the architectural, images that are on a billboard, and the road was looking so beautiful before it came into, of course, before they started the journey to constructing this road. You could see the images on a billboard, the texture drawing were so mega. You'd know that this road is going to be beautiful. Everyone was waiting to see. That road has been on construction for a very long time. And what came out is not what we saw, is not what the Chinese gave to Uganda. And you can still know it's still recorded to be the most expensive road in the world. So you can imagine how much money China is still extorting from Uganda because of this particular road. The road hasn't even served for quite a long time, but they keep on renovating. You still find people reconstructing the road. You can imagine the story. And this still happens only in Africa, where people don't have to question such kind of things, where people think they can do whatever bullshit they want and nobody should question. Now China's expanding presence in Africa intersects with global power dynamics and geopolitical rivalries. I will know, including competition with the Western powers and other emerging economies for influence and also resources in Africa. We know China's engagement in Africa uh, is shaped by its broader strategic interests, including access to resources, markets, and geopolitical um, leverage. For some time, when Chinese were coming, we first saw them come and deal in hotels. They started constructing their hotel. I remember there was one hotel called Shangri-La. I've ever been to that Chinese hotel. Um, there's a hotel. I think there are a lot of. I've seen like 3 to 4 hotels. They first came in hotels. They started building hotels, cooking, having staff, and they went on expanding more and more. And we are seeing Chinese apparently everywhere. And the most funniest thing or the saddest thing of this oil, when the Chinese come into an area, they come with their own rule. They come with they want to rule and they want to have a freedom to do whatever they want. They have that superiority, thinking that for the, oh, thinking that they are bound to do whatever they want to do. Trust, 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 trust. Is your ear again? Did you? Hey, what you want? What you doing?
So capitalism in Africa and China, uh, we see that debates over capitalism in Africa revolve around the best means of rescue the continent from the prolonged period of stagnation and decline. So we see that in the absence of socialist alternative, uh, must focus on the capitalistic development, there is disagreement, however, over the role of Africa, of African state process of as well as over the whether to make the law of raw materials, exports or industrialization. The main the main engines of growth on the side of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, you see that who advocate the neoliberal approach of course, based on being uh, uh, on freeing up markets for cash crop exports and reducing the state control over national development. On the other hand, side stand African scholars, mainly those in the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, who argue for more industrialization and much stronger role for the state. So the colonial legacy and uneven capitalistic development, you see that these debates have not unfolded in a vacuum. They are rooted in colonial legacy and the responses to that legacy by the first generation of African leaders. The Atlantic slave trade and colonialism blocked the conditions for the development of capitalism in Africa in dwarfing all other comers. So the slave trade interrupted the accumulation process necessary for capitalistic development. It is abolition that reversed this trend by creating an open for legitimate commerce, which African producers pursued by increasing their production of raw materials for expanding European markets. Most of the production, however, was based on non-capitalistic labor regimes such as the family and household labor or forced labor by various kinds. Colonialism did not actually alter the structure applicably. We see that because of the colonial powers tended to block the development of the private property and wage, colonial powers tend to block the development of private property and wage labor, with the exception of the migrant labor in the mining and plantation sectors. Although African industries appeared in major African industries appeared in major cities, especially after the World War II. The absence of land markets and predominance of migrant labor ensured that capitalism did not develop fully during the colonial period. To make matters worse, the colonial powers discriminated against African capitalists in favor of non-indigenous entrepreneurs and against women. The main agriculture producers in some capitalism did not take root during the colonial era, but its development was uneven, halting, and incompetent. So, independence, state-led development, and import substitution industrialization. We see that between 1960s and 75 and 1975, the new African leaders pursued industrialization in order to overcome the colonial inheritance. So, rooted in the anti-colonial struggle, some of their programs were socialist, some of the explicit capitalist, others such as the Ethiopia were more difficult to defy. In practice, however, the most African countries shared a commitment to modernization and, of course, uh, industrialization. So these the many we see that many African countries between that time followed the model of import substitution, industrialization, in which governments took control over the national industrialization industry, domestic industries from foreign competition. So we are trying to look at how uh, this, of course, capitalism comes into African politics and African way of doing things. When we look at Ghana and Algeria, provide two examples of socialist variant of the ISI. So with a high percentage of the state-owned enterprises and a professed commitment to the labor rather than capital. In Ghana, we see that Kwame Nkrumah implemented a seven-year development plan. We see that Nkrumah in Ghana imposed a seven-year development plan whereby the year development plan was running from 1957 to 1966, sorry, designed to develop the most, domestic industries, infrastructure, and social welfare. Nkrumah mobilized investment capital, export taxes, foreign borrowing, and the sale of electricity produced by the new Volta hydroelectric dam. Nkrumah's government took control of the country's major industries as well as the agriculture sector, but also provided state-sponsored social services such as education and health care. In Algeria, after the nationalistic revolution between 1959 and 1962, the country's first leader, Ahmed Ben Bella, pursued an orthodox Marxist program, setting out to smash the middle-class traders and bureaucrats. A military coup in 1965 brought a new leader, Houari, who declared a fusion of socialism, Islam, and of course Arabic culture. Although Houari left education and culture matters in the hands of politicians who emphasized Algeria's Islamic heritage, his economic vision was secular, technocratic, and of course socialist between 1966 and 71. The state nationalized 90% of the country's industries, beginning with oil and gas, and then um, extending the industries to production. The idea was to nationalize Algeria's natural resources and to use the profits to, of course, develop the state-owned industries. Uh, Ultimately, the vision failed to achieve its goals, and the Wari socialist program gave way to the increasing Islamization of Algeria. When we go to Kenya, Kenya and South Africa provide illustration of the more capitalistic road to national development. In Kenya, between 1963 and 1978, Jomo Kenyatta supported the African class with the government intervention into agriculture, trade, and production. So this program was not uncontested. A number of prominent trade unionists, including Bildad Kagaya and of course Fred Kaboi, argued for the radical socialist alternative. Kenyatta, of course, fused these elements from the ruling party, the Kenyan African National Union, the KANU, and pushed ahead with the program of the state-managed capitalism. Although one of its most famous architects, Tom Mboya, referred to it as African socialism, while there was an element of redistribution. So the core of Kenyatta Mboya program is better understood as the corporate capitalism, under which the state pattern with labor and capital, domestic and foreign, in pursuit of capital formation and industrialization. So import substitution, industrialization provided the mode with protected home markets for consumer goods and agreements with the foreign firms to import essential capital goods inputs. And of course, by the late of 1970s, Kenyatta had built up strong agriculture and industrial sectors in Kenya. South Africa pursued capitalistic development through ISI from the early date of 1940s with impressive economic results. Industrialization there, however, was racialized, like we see today. Africa's capitalistic ideology is so much racialized. We see uh, uh, racial capitalism in South Africa, and in the post 1948 apartheid state ruthlessly exploited the black population, stripping them of the most basic human and political rights. This strategy worked economically until the 1970s when the economy flattened the African resistance, intensified international sanctions, exacerbated the downward trend in 1980s, and apartheid finally met its end in 1994 when the national elections brought an African National Congress to power under the Nelson Mandela. 30 years after Kenyatta had set out to Africanize the Kenyan economy, South Africa's black majority government faced pressures for similar Africanization, but the state-led option was no longer, of course, on the table. In Ethiopia, we see that Haile Selassie presided after the 1935 over the conversion of the feudal lands into private holdings, especially the southern part of the country. Land sales accelerated between 1960 and 74, producing concentration in the south with farms as big as 200 acres, 200,000 acres using the ISI as the model. So the state inverted the agriculture commercialization along capitalistic lines in industry. The government attempted to develop textile and beverage production. So these policies triggered the development of an Algerian killers during the 1960s as well as a small industrial sector. But these were dependent on foreign capital and insignificant in relation to subsistence agriculture, which of course remained under the domination of the big landlords. Peasant and student resistance to the landlords emerged during the 1970s under the slogan of land to the tiller. So grievances paralleled a wave of army mutinies, resulting in revolution that swept away the emperor's government in favor of the Soviet-backed regime that ruled between 1974 to 77. So, in the end, the ruling military council gave way to the authoritarian regime under Haile Mengistu Mariam program in the countryside. So, the program succeeded in revolutionizing the social basis of power in the rural areas, but Mengistu's authoritarianism produced widespread resistance and the regime finally fell in 1991. So a lot of African countries have tried out these systems, the capitalistic system, but this racial capitalism is something which is new in African countries, which the Chinese have brought in African countries. And by the way, it is not a surprise that we are here to see even other countries being affected by the same by the same problem, uh, uh, racial capitalism. Like I said earlier, racism works hand in hand with capitalism. Those are brothers because they all depend on inequality. There must be a group that is unfavored at the end. So there must be it depends so much on inequality. There must be unfavored group in the process. Thank you guys for those that have been watching us today. Thank you for your efforts. For those that have commented in, to Jabba, K. Williams, and of course, thank you, thank you for setting in for joining the conversation, the show. Thank you for showing support, and it has been great. Royal Constrictor, it's been a long time since the other year. You have been off. you haven't been commenting in, but we are so much glad and happy for those that have been commenting in and for those that have been part of our show today. If you are watching us, like already say, for the first time on YouTube, Black Fire Network 2, remember to subscribe and like, share, and even share our videos because you may watch later. You may save, download these videos on your phone and watch later. For those that have been watching us on Facebook, Black Fire Network radio station, let it be the first time, or you can like in our videos, you can follow the page. For those that have been watching us, of course, even on Twitter, and never to do the same. We always broadcast live from Kampala, Uganda, and INNOSSETU with my colleague.
Africa Maria.
I think we shall meet tomorrow. Thank you for watching.